levels of meaning. Now, what we normally do on the course is look at the methods that courts use to decide the meaning of words. And some of you will be familiar with this case, the case involving Fisher versus Bell, and a case that stated that the words offer for sale in the Restriction of Offensive Weapons Act didn't mean what you'd actually think it would mean. Similarly, the way to understand this really, I think, is to compare it and give some other examples. Similarly, you've got a case of Smith versus Hughes, where the words in a street or public place were also given a meaning that you wouldn't necessarily have thought. In fact, we actually find out that in this case, the words in the street or a public place actually meant a private place. And the defendant in the case of Smith versus Hughes was convicted of her offence, even though at the time she wasn't in a street or a public place. So, without sort of going into sort of the whys and wherefores, I mean, just to refresh your memory, what the courts are doing here is having literal interpretations of words, or what they call the mischief rule, where the words are sort of looked at a deeper sort of meaning, a more flexible kind of meaning. So when Parliament said in the street or a public place, they didn't literally mean in a street or a public place. A private place could, in some situations, be a public place. Now, I've got a problem with that kind of reasoning in the sense that how are you meant to know what the law is? Remember, ignorance of the law is no excuse, and therefore, the law seems to be a very sort of like flexible type thing, whereby sort of in one case, in the Smith and Hughes case, words are going for the sort of the deeper meaning, whereas in the initial case, words are given a very simplistic meaning, a literal meaning. I mean, to remind you, in case you've forgotten, the guy in Fisher versus Bell, he was, to what a normal person would say, he was selling a flick knife. But because literally speaking, he wasn't selling a flick knife, because of the literal definition, he was found not guilty. Whereas the defendant in Smith versus Hughes was found guilty. So basically what I'm trying to say is that meaning is not as straightforward as what you might think it is. The written word can have levels of meaning. Similarly, images have got levels of meaning. The image of Myra Hindley is not just an image of the ordinary mugshot. It's got more things that you can infer in it, in the same way that you can infer meanings into words. And that's what we'd like you to try and get out of this kind of lecture, but out of your studies. That if you as students can see that the written word has layers of meaning, you can see that images have got layers of meaning, then you're going to be on your way to developing the skills that we're trying to develop. You'll be able to think deeply about a subject, you'll be able to evaluate the subject. Okay, so it's looking for that level of meaning, which is what we're trying to do. It's going to be very difficult to find sort of absolute answers as such, but that's the kind of thought process, like I say, that we're trying to develop. So, skills in evaluation is one of the things that we would like to really encourage you to do, and one of the things I want to sort of talk about today. Now, like I say, normally on our criminology courses, an exercise regarding the meaning of written words was what we normally do. And like I say, that was a standard kind of assessment. Yeah, you'd be looking at the couple of things that I've just talked about before, the literal rule and the mischief rule, and we try and get students to kind of talk and analyse what might these words mean, which is the most appropriate sort of meaning for this particular word. That's what we try and do. Critical evaluation of the rules of statutory interpretation. That's what we try and do. We try and get you as students to really argue strongly about having the merits of a literal approach or the merits of a mischief approach. Bearing in mind that you can get these inconsistent decisions and different sort of like ways of doing it. Now, what we found, or what I found over the years that I've been doing this assessment, is that there was a difference between students' opinions in seminars and students' opinions in their assignments. And the two didn't match up. Students could be very critical in seminars and very passionately, very effective arguments in seminars, but then come the written assignment, things change. Things become, a bit less passionate. Things become a bit less direct. A bit of defensiveness, I would say, really. And this kind of question, kept me awake at night. I couldn't quite understand why people could sort of be so different verbally than what they were on paper. So we basically then thought, well, maybe we'll have to sort of have a look at the way we're assessing and, see if we can assess in a different way. So basically, part of the problem I thought was the question there up at the top: is it right? Have I got the right answer? Very, very common question that students would ask, and the response from myself sometimes would be seen, I think, as maybe maybe not the sort of the most appropriate response, because I would say, well, what do you mean? There is no right answer, and sometimes people will be quite disappointed with my reply, but you're asking the wrong kind of question, really, because there is no right answer. But like I say, is it right would be a very, very common question. Now, part of the reason for that is, I'm not sort of knocking students. I understand why. It's partly because we use textbooks. Now, I'm not saying then you don't need to read textbooks, obviously, but what I am saying is you need to think about textbooks, and this basically they have a tendency to encourage the right answers. It's, well, I'm doing it right. Textbooks create this kind of defensiveness that you think that you've got to do it the right kind of way. Now, what Takata and Curran go on to say is that if we sort of talk about visual imagery, then visual imagery allows people to be a bit more critical. It allows people to think for yourself. I mean, that's, the absolute sort of like point that I really would want to stress, the bit at the end, that one may be bold to think for oneself. That is what we as lecturers, are really trying to do with students, is to sort of empower you to be able to have the confidence to think for yourself. Not do it the way the books tell you to. Do it the way that you genuinely think. It's your opinion. Your opinion based on your reading. That's what we sort of think. And I think sometimes a written exercise doesn't allow people to think for themselves. It thinks, well, I've got to do it the right way. I've got to do it, the standard kind of way. So like I say, so we believe that visual imagery can be used in ways that help your evaluation of the written word. One doesn't replace the other. Yeah, the two are, are complementary. Now, with the assessment that we did, was, as it says there, to develop people's skills. The first thing that we did was do these additional modes of assessments, and the first thing was to photograph invisible crime. Now, in terms of how could I do that right? Well, it basically put the students in the position of, well, you were in charge, you were in control, you decided what crime was invisible, you did it. There was no right answer. Yeah, it was down to the individual. And this kind of sort of thinking skills, is what we're about. And basically, as I say, that was the first kind of like, sort of test that we did. And I did quite like it, going into a room full of students saying, well, you've got to go and photograph something that's invisible. And there were a few kind of like, sort of questioning faces. But it happened, it did, it worked. They did it. They did photograph the invisible. So it is possible. Now also, as it says there, the point was to test the students' abilities in evaluating the way the criminal law deals with different but equivalent types of behaviour. That was the point. The point was to see the inequality between certain crimes' treatment and the treatment that other crimes get. Yeah, that was what we were trying to represent, and get students to critically evaluate the legal system as to why it seems to prosecute certain types of offences, but other similar offences don't really count. They're not real crime. So that was, sort of the aim of the assignment. Also, what we were trying to do was empower the students in a way that John Dewey, who very much was kind of attributed the phrase of people learn by doing. It's a phrase from John Dewey from the 1920s. He said, very strongly believed in that people learn by doing. So in other words, you need to be active. Even though you're studying at degree level, you can still do this active thing. get out there and start doing things in an active kind of way. It's a very powerful way of learning. Robert Park, who most of you will certainly have heard of, again, very big into the idea of getting out there and doing things for yourself. This is how you learn. Lectures and seminars we can do a fair bit, but if you really want an effective learning experience, you've got to do it for yourself. Now, Robert Park's sort of rallying call, a very sort of like famous quote from this from the 1920s, was basically it says there, get out there, get out there, go to these luxury hotels, go to these flop houses, go to the Gold Coast settees, go to the Orchestra Hall, go to the Star and Garter. In short, and this is the phrase that most people remember, go and get the seat of your pants dirty in real research. Real research is out there in the community, observing things for yourself, is being this kind of active kind of learner. And this is what this assignment did, is that it made people, they didn't do this assignment in the library, they did this assignment out there. They did it on the streets, they did it in the community. That kind of learning, very, very powerful. Very, very powerful. And like I say, it would approve sort of like supporters of sort of Robert Park. Now, basically, what then happened as a result of this type of assessment was that we came across diversity that we'd never come across before. I think it was to do with this, we were allowing students to think for themselves, as opposed to following the standard textbook kind of answer. So basically, we got discussions about things like elder abuse. Now, in all the time that I've been lecturing, when we've done this type of assignment, I've never had a student talk to me about elder abuse. But this assignment, it did happen. Psychological abuse of children, or poverty, and the effects of recession. All these kind of issues were raised by students as crimes and harms that are invisible. This width to topics, this kind of, this diversity was one of the best things about this kind of initiative. We were recognising that there wasn't one right answer. Different people played sort of like different roles, and it did demonstrate original thinking. Now, basically, what we want to get out of this kind of task is, if you are doing visual assessments, they're meant to complement your written work. I'm not saying one's better, we're not saying one's worse, we're saying that they will complement each other. If you accept that images have layers of meaning, then hopefully you'll remember that thinking that you did when you start looking at the written word, and you'll start appreciating that the written word has layers of meaning as well. And that's what we want, is appreciating the different levels of meaning and trying to, like I say, just like I say, just appreciate the different layers of meaning. Now, I just want to put on the video, just for a minute or so.